Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government, politics, and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1, Sunday morning at 8:30 and then repeated again in the afternoon at 4:30. Also, you'll find Wichita Liberty TV at my site, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. There you'll also find show notes for today's episode, all the past issues and episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, and then all the other research and articles that I and others produce. So this week our guest is Andy Hooser. He's operations manager at KQAM Radio, that's AM 1480, although more than that, and I'll let him tell us about that. He's also host of his talk show, The Voice of Reason with Andy Hooser. That's broadcast Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. So Andy, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
I love being with you, Bob.
Well,
it's a great time.
Thanks, me too, Andy. I know you've been here before, and our listeners will notice that Carl Peterjohn taking this week off. So I mentioned KQAM is AM 1480. Certainly it is, but there's FM, there's the Mid-America. What exactly is the whole scope of your responsibilities, and what is KQAM and all that?
Oh, sure. We got the whole plethora. KQAM 1480, as you mentioned, on the AM dial. As of last fall, we got on the FM as well at 102.5. Okay. So you can hear that. That's pretty much within Wichita city limits, is pretty much where you can pick that up, but you're more than welcome to check that out.
And is it the exact same program all hours?
Exact same programming. Yep, it's simulcast 24 hours a day, all day long with the same programming, so you can just get it there in high definition frequency. Mm-hmm. We have, as you mentioned, being program director and operations manager, I have a lot of duties. As we have our sports station, KGSO as well, along with our Mid-America Ag Network, and then our stations out west in Garden City and Guyman, Oklahoma, where I oversee the operational and programming duties for them as well. So we have a lot going on over there at Steckline Communications.
Yeah, I know when I've been there, of course, there's Stacey Austin, the news reporter, and maybe others, but then there's also Craig Miner, the agriculture reporter.
Yep, Craig Mead. Our agriculture our reporter. He does hourly market report updates. He does agricultural news. He does weather for all the farmers, kind of get an idea for what the soil temperatures are going to look like and what the weather's going to be moving in, so they can plan accordingly for their planting and harvesting seasons.
And besides terrestrial radio, that is, the over-the-air broadcast, you're also available through internet in several ways. My favorite way is the TuneIn Radio app,
yep.
I think.
Yep, TuneIn Radio. We got the online stream for the station as well, for all of our stations. Along with, we just started for the show especially, we have our Facebook Live feed now as well, to where we have a video feed, so whoever wants to see my ugly mug, they have an opportunity to do so. But they can go into Facebook, go to KQAM's Facebook page or my Voice of Reason page, and be able to see the Facebook Live every morning as well.
It's interesting, if you have like Chromecast or Apple TV or something, you can actually cast it from your iPhone to your big TV. So
well, there we go. Officially on the big screen then.
Exactly right. Yeah. So. Well, thanks for filling us in there. Andy, a few weeks ago, you were the speaker at the Wichita Pachyderm Club, and your topic was, can we save millennials? So, first of all, I just want to make sure. I looked up what's the definition of millennial, and there is no precise definition, but it seems like the consensus at Wikipedia is people born in the early 1980s to the mid-1990s or 2000s. So basically people about 22 to 37 in that neighborhood.
Exactly. It's the young generation that's just coming out of high school, either in college or just post-college, as you mentioned, early to mid-30s-ish. It's the generation that I made the case of, and still make the case of, which I advocate for being one of them, that they have grown up entitled in many ways. They've grown up not really experiencing the fight to be able to defend the certain things that we have as a nation that we hold very precious and dear to us, which is why we're seeing a lot of protests in universities. We're seeing a lot of the safe spaces. We're seeing a lot of the riots and protests going on because of President Donald Trump, and some of the conservative and Republican movements we're seeing. They don't quite grasp how to become an adult yet. I showed the example of how the average millennial doesn't see themselves as an adult until the age of 30. And it has to do a lot with, student loan debt. It has a lot to do with them not getting on their feet until a later age. but it also has to do with the responsibilities and with the work ethic that they've grown up with, or the lack thereof, and kind of how we can actually try to appeal to them and show them what conservative values actually are so that they can get on the right path.
You know, Jay Price, he's a history professor at Wichita State. He's talked to the Pachyderm Club a couple times about the generational shifts throughout the years, and really got me thinking. For example, millennials, they may have been infants or at least young teenagers when the terrorist attacks of 9/11, 2001 happened. So that's not something that they lived through as adults like I did. And, you know, I was a teenager during Watergate and so forth. And so, you know, millennials, that's probably like ancient history. But here we're coming back where you see the word Watergate being tossed around all the time with regard to our national policy. So, Andy, we're going to take a moment off, but when we get back, let's talk a bit more about the millennials and what are some other characteristics and what do we need to do to save them, which was the topic of your Pachyderm Club speech. Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks with radio talk show host Andy Hooser this week. So Andy, saving the millennials, I think a lot of what you talked about at the Pachyderm Club was that millennials are generally not conservatives, I don't think. Is that right?
For the most part. Obviously there are. I mean, myself being one, there are many of them, but just like the majority of conservatives, they're doing other things, not necessarily being the political activists as some of the progressives are. But the majority of them, or a large portion of them, are the more left-wing activists. And my case was at least trying to reach them and make them understand our side, rather than just throwing in our face that we're hateful, bigoted individuals, that we're closed-minded, that we don't accept or understand, or so on and so forth, because they like to shut down the dialogue before the dialogue even happens. And we need to, in order to do so, I looked at the reasons why they do that. And one of them is, for one, they don't go to events like the Pachyderm Club. They don't watch things like this. They don't listen to radio programs. They're tuned into their own world, so they're not really getting the information. With the information wave that we have, with being able to Google whatever we want to online, we don't necessarily reach them by giving them the information they need to understand our perspective.
So do you think that the variety of information sources available today has something to do? I mean, when I grew up, we had ABC, CBS, and NBC. The news was pretty much the same on all of them.
Sure. There
wasn't a whole lot of other places to get news, at least on a daily basis. And now we have the rise of social media, too. All of that has an impact, too, do you think?
Oh, it absolutely does, because you can go on and you get your information now, for one, is by Twitter or by Facebook, which means you're getting a 130-character tweet about information, maybe posting a link to a story, but that's where they're getting their news. They're not doing the research and looking deep into an issue like we used to do, trying to understand more so of it. They think they're an expert after they hear one or two tweets from Bernie Sanders, which is the problem. They're also, with the information wave, when you Google something, you can get completely two opposing views of an issue. And you can have that quote-unquote sustained fact or fact check or information, and then you get to choose which one you believe, rather than saying, wait a second, this one may not be credible because of X, Y, and Z. Anybody can post whatever they want to on social media or online for a Google search. So the information out there is so vast that they don't know where to go. And being ones where they like to do more the individual thing rather than going to a group in an organization trying to understand something, they're just kind of left on their own to figure it out, and they've kind of misled the wrong way.
Well, speaking of two opposite sides butting together, you know, in Topeka during our trying to finish up the session of the Kansas legislature for this year, there's still very big important issues that have to be resolved, and there are these two sides that they're not exactly equally split. For example, there's a lot more legislators that are willing to raise taxes than cut spending, but the governor is one of those who's opposed to a tax increase, and you have to have 2/3 to be able to override, you know, the governor's veto. So you've had quite a few legislators and the governor on all throughout the legislative session. Are we stuck in a rut, do you think, up there?
We really are, and I do. I have the governor on every Thursday on the show to give us a weekly update. I try and have at least one elected official on once or twice a week to give us an update and talk about these. And you're right. It's not a party line thing either, and that's the weird thing. It's not a Republican versus Democrat issue going on right now. It's a progressive versus conservative ideology. The last election that we had, we got rid of a lot of conservative legislators for the more quote-unquote moderates, and every
It's still
bill...
Republicans in
It's still
most
Republicans.
cases.
They have the R in front of their name, but the problem is that every one of the bills that have been proposed so far about tax increases, the largest tax increases in the state's history, have been proposed by Republicans. So right now we have an ideological war within the Republican Party on what we're actually going to stand for, because they got elected in to do, not necessarily say that we're going to raise taxes and raise spending, but say we're going to do the opposite of what Governor Brownback wants.
They never really say we're going to raise taxes, at least most of them
Or else
don't,
they wouldn't get elected.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders might be an exception, I don't know, but they want to reform our failed experiment tax policy or whatever it is.
Which, when you read between the lines, you understand that tax reform was going towards lower taxes, which means the reform is going to go higher. But a lot of people didn't necessarily read into that, so we're in that situation now to where they don't have quite enough to override governor's vetoes when he vetoes things.
Very close margin.
Very close margin, within 2 to 3 votes, really. But they have just enough to try and push that agenda as far as they possibly can. We're running up on the 100 days here for the legislative session. I feel that they're going to try and bully the conservatives, the few that are in there, to say that you guys have to get on board before we start paying special into the special session. We start paying $45,000 a day while they're in there additionally, and you guys better get on board because we have the majority and we're not budging, therefore you have to. And I think that's what we're going to run into.
And while it's a shame, I guess, to spend money on the legislative days that we don't have to, I think it's much more important, even at $45,000 a day, to get the right policy rather than just any policy. And by the way, what are Democrats and progressives so opposed to government spending? I mean, they're in favor of government spending.
It's funny how that happens, right?
So yeah, they ought to be thankful for more legislative days. But it is kind of a problem because I know after a while the budget for the support staff, the secretaries and clerks, starts to fade away, and the legislators are there running more on their own. They still have the professional staff like the reviser of statutes and the legislative research office. They couldn't write legislation without that, but it does get to be a problem. Andy, let's keep going on Kansas State topics in a few moments. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks with Andy Hooser of KQAM Radio and the Voice of Reason with Andy Hooser show. So we've been talking about a little bit about the state of Kansas, trying to get through this legislative session. It seems like there's going to be a tax increase, don't you think?
There's going to. It depends on what it's going to be, but that's where the position we're at right now. As we mentioned, with the makeup of the legislative session, there's going to be a tax increase. It's just how far they actually go. I think we've drawn the line in the sand when they tried to do that massive tax increase they tried back in February, that the governor did veto, that they overrode his veto in the House but came within 3 votes shy in the Senate. I think the line has been drawn there. I'm hoping that they push back a little bit and they come to a little more commonsensical, realistic term here, but we'll see. They may try and force their hand, as again, coming into a special session with spending. It's going to happen. Right now we have one floating about education spending, additionally just up to $2 billion over the next 5 years being phased in. There's another bill talking about phasing in the third tax bracket again, along with, of course, repealing the LLC corporate tax breaks. There's one that's just being floated right now of just doing a flat-out repeal of everything since 2012 with the tax reform and just going back to it, again, proposed by a Republican. And the latest that actually passed the House a couple days ago and went into the Senate, and they're reviewing, is doing a sales tax, where they're going to do a 1% sales tax reduction on food while they get rid of some tax exemptions on some other goods. For one, that's only going to create $135 million. If that's it, I would be okay with that as a happy compromise. I don't think that's going to be it. The sad part about it, though, is that they essentially get whatever they want without any tax reductions, because the sales tax on the food, the 1% sales tax reduction there, is going to be phased in 3 years in 2020. Well, that's only doing a 2-year budget. they're going to be able to get rid of that in the next budget when they craft it 2 years from now in 2019, saying, well, we're in the same situation. We can't afford a sales tax reduction, so it's going to go away. So
like
they're just kind of kicking the can down.
At the national level, that happens too. We raise taxes in exchange for promises of future spending reductions, but those future spending reductions never happen. Mike Pompeo said that here, right in that chair, many times. So we do have to be careful about that. But the sales tax, we do have a high sales tax rate on food, one of the highest in the country. Many states either have no sales tax on food, or maybe just like 2 or 3 or 4%, something like that. So
sure.
I think I'm in favor of that, and I've written about that, but I mean, it's quite a bit of revenue that we'd have to either raise somewhere else or make up spending cuts to do that.
Which they don't want to do.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think it's always much easier to cut taxes than to cut spending, because you can even get Democrats to vote for tax cuts. But you talked about the LLC loophole, and I think a lot of the rhetoric is that the rich guys like Wink Hartman and Charles Koch and whoever, they're skating by on this LLC loophole, when really the majority of those people are small business people, are farmers and so forth, that aren't really escaping all that much tax. I think of those 2012 tax cuts, wasn't about 70% individual income tax cuts, 30% the LLC loophole, if we're going to call it that. So they want to bring all those taxes back.
No, they want to bring them all back. They want to do the property taxes, the gas tax, they want to do income taxes, they want to do the corporate taxes there, the LLC, and that's going to, I mean, we're seeing the uptrend. Right now we're at a 17-year low on unemployment rates here for the state of Kansas. We're seeing job growth. We're seeing the commodity prices slowly tick back up for farmers, but they're projected to not even gain very much of a profit this year with what they're going to be growing. And we're going to put that kind of a burden back onto them. To me, that is the most absurd thing to even think about or consider right now. And even they admit that the agriculture prices are down, so they want to make the game fair again. I see all these media stories about how these companies and these law firms and these corporations feel guilty about all the money that they get back from their taxes when they file their taxes because of these tax breaks. But again, and I know you've talked about it, Dave Trauber's talked about it with the Kansas Policy Institute, about how the number of jobs that have been created with that pass-through income tax break for these corporations, it's not giving them a break, it's giving the opportunity for them to actually hire people, and we've seen the benefits of that in the state.
We've still, unfortunately in Kansas, we've had some anemic economic growth. You mentioned part of it, farm prices, oil prices are another, and then the really the collapse of manufacturing in Wichita centered around the aircraft industry. Spirit Aerosystem does well because their customer is Boeing, but for the corporate jets and so forth like Cessna builds, unfortunately that market hasn't been coming back. And they say, okay, Governor Brownback said these tax cuts would be, what, a shot in the arm or something like that. We need to do it to grow jobs. And they say, well, the jobs haven't grown that much. But I remember 8 years ago, Barack Obama said, if you don't pass a stimulus bill, unemployment's going to be this high. Well, we passed a stimulus bill, and unemployment went that high and stayed that high for quite a bit longer. Do you know what this is, Andy?
That would be the difference of lies from the progressives trying to tell us about spending.
Well, generically, this is an Arkansas PowerPoint. So.
Well, that too. There we go. There we go.
So, to hold politicians responsible for their boasting, know, is, as adults, we ought to know not really to do that. But it is, we are suffering in Kansas, but I just don't see the case made for how increasing taxes will fix that. It will make balancing the budget easier, but as far as actually helping the Kansas economy grow, I'm not sure about that. So we're going to take another moment off for a commercial break, and we'll be back with the last segment of Wichita Liberty TV for this week. Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV again with our guest Andy Hooser of KQAM Radio and the Voice of Reason with Andy Hooser. So I warned you that I'd ask you this question. Who do you think is going to be the President of the United States at this time next year?
It will be Donald Trump.
Okay.
It will be Donald Trump. There is the scare tactic that's going on because of the investigations with the connection ties to Russia, because of the firing of James Comey. We've had one Democrat and one Republican now in Congress call for the impeachment of Donald Trump, which is absurd. If you want to talk about who's being investigated, we should probably look at his opponent that was in the general election, who had two different investigations on her about classified information in their private servers and so on and so forth. And the presidents have fired FBI heads and other positions in the administration before. Everything he's done is completely legal. There's no reason for him to have to be called for an impeachment. So it's the scare tactic. It's got people in frantics and chaos. They want him gone. They're desperate to get him gone because they despise him so much, but he will be president in a year.
And they really do despise him. By that I mean the progressive or liberals. And if you watch cable television, I mean, there's a huge split. At Fox News, for example, they blame the leakers, the people who are leaking this, while on the other two major stations, CNN and MSNBC, it's all anti-Trump, and they call this even more serious than the Watergate scandal of well, it's been 40 years ago by now, I think. So.
I'd still like to know where they keep talking about the ties with him. I'd like to know where those ties are. They haven't seen him in the financial records. Some of his tax returns did come out. No ties there whatsoever. I'd like to see where it is in maybe with them voting or hacking into voting booths and being able to vote for Donald Trump that way. There's no evidence at all but their claims, and that's what they're running on. I have not seen a single bit of evidence yet showing any kind of tie with Vladimir Putin or the Russians. They tried to tie in about giving information to the Russians with a meeting a couple days ago in the White House, but it was completely illegal. Should he have done it? I don't know. I don't know exactly what all was in it, but it doesn't matter. He hasn't broken any laws yet. Therefore, there's no grounds for impeachment still, but yet they're calling for it.
And now we have a special counsel just appointed this week, and I think at least Republicans are maybe kind of relieved a little bit because this is seen as maybe a pause. Let's wait and let the special counsel do the job, and then we'll go on and do something else, which is try to pass some legislation like tax reform and so forth like that. A lot of critics of the new president say he really hasn't had much success in legislation or other major things.
Well, and that's not necessarily his fault. I mean, they've been calling, and I've had even listeners on the show call me up and say he hasn't done what he's promised yet. He hasn't done it. We want a full repeal of Obamacare. We want the tax reform. We want the wall built. And it hasn't happened yet, which he's called for it. He's tried it. But when you have even the Republican Party that's fought against him, again, it sounds familiar with the state, doesn't it? With the unison going on within the Republican Party, or lack thereof, they're not able to get the agenda done of what they need to. They tried a health care repeal bill in the first time, which I'm glad it didn't work. But the Freedom Caucus, they're not the ones that held it up. They're the ones that negotiated more things into it to make it better, and the establishment was the ones that voted against it. This bill that did pass in the House just a few weeks ago was the one where 0 Democrats voted for it, and there are 20 Republicans, none of them Freedom Caucus members, none of them Tea Party conservatives, that voted with the Democrats against it. It's his own party.
These are like representatives from districts that Hillary Clinton may have won in the election, where they're maybe concerned about their own re-election possibilities.
They're more moderate Republicans.
So we see a couple things going on. We see this new term, the deep state, that's, I think, been started to be bandied about since Trump was elected some 6 or 7 months ago. This being the permanent class of bureaucrats and lobbyists and everybody who makes a very comfortable living off of government, and they're perhaps worried that Trump may upset that apple cart in some way.
Well, and that's what he went there to do. He went there to shake it up. He was the establishment, the anti-establishment outsider that was going to shake up the system, and that's what he's doing, which is why you're seeing so much outcry and outrage against it, because even people who could have been okay with him just kind of riding through the term are seeing some of their special interests that get into the budgets. They're nice little porculets.
Cutting the budget of EPA, for example.
Well, I mean, that's even in this budget bill that went to September, they still got 99% of their funding. So there wasn't a whole lot of cutting in there.
You know what? Even that 1% in a big bureaucracy like that, that's a lot of probably some people that might be losing their jobs.
It's a start. It's a start. So we're on the right track, but that's why you're seeing so much outcry, is because he is trying to do that. And when you start shaking that cage, they're not going to be very happy about it. So they can try it, and I think they will continue to try to impeach him, get him out of there, and move him along. I hope it doesn't happen, because even though I'm not the biggest fan of Donald Trump, I think he's serving a positive purpose that we can get behind.
And of course, underlying is all this, that starting about this time next year, there's going to be congressional primaries throughout the country. Even before this time next year, our primaries in Kansas are in August, which is pretty late in the season compared to some other states. So almost everything people do now starts to have electoral consequences, and especially in Kansas, we just elected a new congressman, Ron Estes, in a special session. There's going to be a new congressman in the 2nd District of Kansas. Lynn Jenkins is retiring. So, and a new governor next year, too, we're going to have to choose.
It's going to be a fun election.
Yeah. Well, Andy, for your wisdom on that, they're going to have to tune into your show on radio, I think, because we're out of time for today. So, Andy Hooser, thanks very much for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. We'll be back again next week.